The ship creaked like an old man's knees, and it smelled about as bad. It wasn't winning any beauty contests, but hell, it was home. Captain Sable's domain, the Driftwood. Some called it a ship, most just called it a bad joke with engines. After the Galactic War, this was humanity's last stand, a floating junkyard with delusions of grandeur and a crew too stubborn to die. "Got a new one for you," rasped Jax, the Driftwood's self-appointed jester and part-time janitor, as he leaned against a wall that looked ready to collapse. "Why don't aliens eat human food? Because it tastes like crap," I guessed, only half listening. My attention was on the rusty console in front of me, which displayed a whole lot of blinking red lights. That wasn't good. Nah, 'cause they can't stand our cooking. No taste buds evolved for burnt rations. Jax laughed, a sound like gravel in a blender. He had a point. The ship's food was more of a chew and swallow kind of experience. Across from us, Captain Sable sat in her chair, more a throne, really, composed of scavenged metal and humanity's last hopes. She was a force of nature with an eye for profit and a disdain for weakness. "Less jokes, more work," she barked, eyes sharp as a laser scalpel. "Aye aye, Captain," Jax saluted with exaggerated flair, shambling off to pretend to fix something. Sable eyed me with a look that could cut steel. "So, what've you got?" "Nothing good," I admitted, tapping the console as if that would help. Engines one hiccup away from a fatal cough. I didn't mention the sideways glance I gave the button labeled self-destruct. Not that anyone would miss this floating coffin. "Get it fixed," she said. Simple as that, like I could just snap my fingers and magic up some new parts from the ether. I nodded, because arguing with Sable was like trying to teach a rock to sing. "And what about the other issue?" Sable asked, voice low. "Ah, the other issue. The whole reason we were having this heartwarming little chat. I'd almost forgotten, which meant I was getting better at this whole selective memory thing. The whispering's getting louder," I said, leaning in. "People are talking about it." It, of course, referred to the mysterious alien biological weapon we'd stumbled upon. Part Pandora's box, part doomsday device, it promised to be as helpful as a drunk surgeon. "And what are they saying?" Sable's tone was casual, but her eyes were anything but. "Some think it could cure everything from hangovers to heartbreak," I shrugged. "Others figure it's more likely to blow us all to hell before lunch." Sable snorted. "If we could turn a profit on rumors, we'd be rich by now." "Captain," I ventured, trying not to sound like I was about to suggest something monumentally stupid. "What if we just got rid of it and miss out on the chance to end up as gods or ghosts? Where's your sense of adventure?" She grinned, a dangerous flash of teeth that promised both salvation and damnation. Lost it around the time I realized we were spearheading the human extinction tour. I glanced at the crew milling about the ship, faces as worn as the metal they walked on. "Besides, adventure's overrated." Sable leaned back, considering. "We'll keep it for now, but if anyone so much as sneezes suspiciously near it, you let me know." "Aye, Captain," I agreed, because what else was there to say? Just then the comms crackled to life with a sound like two angry cats fighting over a tin of beans. "Captain, we've got a situation in the cargo bay," came a voice thick with nerves. "When don't we?" I muttered, but Sable was already on her feet, moving with the kind of purpose that suggested this was about to get interesting, in the way a meteor striking your house is interesting. We made our way to the cargo bay, a place that had seen better days and enjoyed none of them. The crew had gathered, a band of misfits and survivors looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. "What's the problem?" Sable demanded, cutting through the chatter like a machete through vines. Max, a wiry guy with a permanent look of mild terror, pointed at a container that was vibrating ominously. "It's that damn thing, Captain. It's doing something," Sable echoed, her eyebrow raised. "That's specific. It's glowing," Max added helpfully, and sure enough, the mysterious box was lit up like a Christmas tree if Christmas trees were terrifying and possibly lethal. I studied it, trying to ignore the fact that it looked ready to explode or possibly turn us all into goo. "Maybe it's reacting to something," I suggested. "Like what?" Sable asked, a touch of impatience in her voice. "Our sparkling personalities," I ventured, because why not? We were already in deep, might as well drown with style. Sable sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. "How about someone opens it?" "I'll pass," Max said quickly, taking a step back. "I vote against spontaneous disintegration," Jax chimed in from somewhere in the back. "Fine," Sable said. "I'll do it." The room went silent. Say what you will about Captain Sable, but she had guts or a death wish. Sometimes those were hard to tell apart. She approached the container with a kind of reckless grace, like someone stepping onto a stage they couldn't see the edge of. The rest of us held our breath, because watching your captain get vaporized wasn't high on anyone's to-do list. With a deftness that belied the uncertainty of the situation, Sable cracked open the container. We all waited, tense as hell. Inside, something pulsated with a sickly light. It was organic, alien, and as inviting as a punch to the gut. "What the hell is that?" Jax asked, voicing the question on everyone's mind. Our ticket to immortality, Sable replied, though it was hard to tell if she was being sincere or sarcastic. Maybe a bit of both, or instant death, I added, not to be left out of the optimism party. Details, Sable waved a hand dismissively. It's always the details. As we stood there, contemplating our newfound problem or opportunity or whatever the hell it was, a thought struck me. You know, I said, if this thing doesn't kill us, maybe we could use it. Use it, Sable asked, amused. I mean, it could be a weapon, right? Or medicine, or, I don't know, a great way to prank your enemies. We'd be insane to try, Max chimed in. Who said we weren't? Sable replied with a grin. We all shared a laugh, one of those laughs that bubbles up from the depth of survival instinct, because if you don't laugh, you cry, and tears don't float well in the vacuum of space. All right, listen up, Sable said, drawing us back in. We're keeping this under wraps. No one outside this room knows. Got it. Nods all around. Loose lips might not sink ships anymore, but they sure as hell could get us all killed. And what about testing it? I asked cautiously. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it, Sable replied, ever the pragmatist. But for now, we need to focus on keeping this ship from falling apart. You mean more than it already is? Jax asked. Exactly, Sable said, a hint of a smile tugging at her lips. Now get back to work. We've got a long haul ahead of us. As we dispersed, the weight of the unknown hung heavy in the air. The alien weapon, whatever it was, had the potential to change everything, or end everything. But that was for tomorrow to worry about. Today, we had a ship to keep running. A ship filled with secrets, sarcasm, and the faint hope that maybe, just maybe, we'd make it out alive. And if we didn't, at least we'd go down swinging, with a dark joke on our lips and a middle finger aimed at the universe, because that's just how we rolled on the driftwood. Back on the driftwood, nothing said impending doom quite like the smell of burnt wiring and desperation. We were about to find out just what this alien doohickey could do, and let me tell you, enthusiasm was running neck and neck with terror. It was like watching a fireworks show performed by a chimp with a lighter. That thing, Jack said, pointing a thumb over his shoulder at the ominously pulsating crate, is either our ticket to salvation or a really fancy way to get us all killed. That's the spirit, I replied. If only we had popcorn. Captain Sable was in a mood to make decisions, and when Captain Sable was in a mood, mountains moved, or, at the very least, cringed in fear. Gather the crew, she instructed, her voice echoing through the corridors like a drill sergeant with a megaphone. We need a plan. The crew assembled in the galley, which doubled as a meeting room, dining hall, and occasionally a wrestling ring when tensions boiled over. Max and Jax, along with a few other dubious characters, shuffled in with expressions that suggested they'd rather walk barefoot on a spacewalk. All right, Sable began, commanding the room's attention like a bartender with free drinks. We've got ourselves a dilemma. This alien weapon or miracle, I interjected, earning a glare. I put my hands up defensively. Just saying could be both. Whatever it is, Sable continued, ignoring me, it's got potential. Problem is potential to do what? We don't know, blow us up, probably, Jax quipped, earning a nervous chuckle from the room. But there's a chance, Sable said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that made everyone lean in like she was telling ghost stories. There's a chance it could cure the plague. The silence that followed was thick enough to cut with a rusty knife. The plague was the uninvited guest at every human party, the gift that kept on taking. If this alien tech could cure it, well, that was a game changer. How do we know it's not just another deadly alien mousetrap? Max asked, skepticism dripping from his words like grease from a spoon. Last thing we need is another disaster. That's why we need to test it, Sable replied, scanning the room for anyone dumb enough to volunteer. Test it on what? Jax asked, scratching his head. Or who, not who. We don't need any volunteers for the next hey, what's this button do disaster, I said, earning nods of agreement. But maybe we do need someone who can make sense of it. As if on cue, Kess strolled in, someone who seemed to have a permanent I know something you don't grin. She was the resourceful type, always with a plan, never with an explanation. I hear you have a cosmic conundrum. We have a potential miracle, I corrected, though the sarcasm was a bit too thick for my own liking. Miracle or not, Kess said, sliding into a seat, we need to figure out how to use it without blowing ourselves to pieces or, becoming alien guinea pigs. How about our resident mad scientist, Dr. Juno? I asked, trying not to sound too enthusiastic. Juno was a wild card, a mix between a savior and someone who might turn you inside out just to see how you tick. Juno might be our best shot, Sable agreed. If anyone can crack this without cracking us, it's her. Finding Juno was like hunting for a ghost in a fog. She had a habit of disappearing into the bowels of the ship, tinkering with things that might or might not explode, leaving trails of questionable smoke and the occasional bright flash. When we finally tracked her down in the ship's makeshift lab, a cluttered chaos of wires, glowing vials, and more blinking lights than a Christmas tree on speed, she was hunched over a microscope, muttering to herself. Juno, Sable called, her voice cutting through the hum of a nearby machine that sounded like it was dying. Got a job for you. Juno looked up, her eyes magnified by her goggles to cartoonish proportions. Oh, if it involves saving the world, I'll need more coffee. We've got an alien device that might just cure the plague, Kess explained succinctly. Think you can make sense of it? Juno glanced at the crate with a mixture of curiosity and caution. Well, if I can't, nobody can. But I warn you, success doesn't come without risks. Risks are what we do best, Jax chimed in. Unfortunately, Sable added dryly. All right, Juno, see what you can do, but no mad scientist routines. We need practical, not theatrical. Juno nodded, already lost in thought, which probably meant she was about to get creative in ways that broke a dozen intergalactic laws. As she went to work, the rest of us dispersed with a mix of hope and dread. Hope that she'd find a cure, and dread that the next time we saw her, she might be missing eyebrows or limbs. Meanwhile, the crew's gossip mill was churning at full speed. The thought of curing the plague had spread faster than the flu through a kindergarten. Everyone had a theory, and none of them were particularly reassuring. By the time we met up again, the tension on the ship was as thick as a politician's promise. We needed a plan, and fast. Sable gathered us in the galley once more, where the air was ripe with the scent of burnt coffee and unwashed bodies. We need a fallback, she stated, her tone leaving no room for debate. If this thing works, that's great. If not, we sell it to the highest bidder, Jax suggested, only half joking. Sable's eyes glinted with the kind of mischief reserved for pirates and politicians. Exactly. If it's not a cure, it's a weapon, and weapons have a way of finding buyers. Even if it's a dud, Max asked. Especially if it's a dud, I said. A good bluff can go a long way. But what about the people? Kess asked, her tone catching the room off guard. If this thing can cure the plague, we have to try and make it work for everyone, not just line our pockets. She had a point, and a noble one at that. But nobility was about as rare as a clean pair of socks on this ship. So what's the plan? I asked, trying to bridge the gap between profit and idealism. We let Juno do her thing, Sable decided, and we keep our options open. If it looks like a cure, we'll see what we can do about distribution. And if it doesn't, Jax persisted. Then we sell it, Sable replied with a shrug. Simple as that. The pragmatism of it all was almost comforting. On the Driftwood, survival was a day-to-day business, and Sable was nothing if not a savvy businesswoman. As the meeting broke up, I caught up with Kess in the corridor. You really think we can make this work for everyone? I asked, curious about her optimism. Kess shrugged. I think if we don't try, we're no better than the ones who put us in this mess to begin with. Fair enough, I replied, wishing I shared her faith in humanity. My cynicism was a comfortable old coat I found hard to discard. The next few days were a blur of anticipation and anxiety, with the ship's usual creaks and groans underscoring our unease. Juno was knee-deep in alien tech, and her progress was as much a mystery as the thing she was trying to decipher. When she finally emerged from her lab, she looked like she'd been wrestling with chaos itself, and maybe won a round or two. Her hair was standing on end, and her clothes were sporting new scorch marks. Got something, she announced, her voice scratchy from too much caffeine and not enough sleep. Good news or bad? I asked, not sure which I wanted to hear more. Neither or both. Depends on how you look at it, Juno replied cryptically. Care to elaborate? Kess prompted. Juno held up a device that looked like a cross between a defibrillator and a blender. This little beauty, she said, grinning like a kid with a new toy, might just be the answer to our prayers or our last rites. Can it cure the plague? Sable asked, cutting to the chase. In theory, Juno replied, but it's unstable, could work or could turn the infected into something else. Else, Jax echoed. Define else, something that's not exactly human, Juno answered, with the kind of nonchalance that made me question her sanity. But hey, at least they wouldn't have the plague anymore. Sable rubbed her temples, the weight of command pressing down like a lead blanket. So we have a maybe cure with a side of potentially monstrous side effects. Pretty much, Juno confirmed, unperturbed. Which means we're back to square one, I said, trying to keep the frustration from boiling over. Not quite, Kess interjected, a thoughtful look on her face. If we can stabilize it, maybe we could make it work. And how do you propose we do that? Sable asked, sounding more intrigued than skeptical. We need a controlled environment, Kess suggested. Somewhere we can test it without risking everyone on the ship. Juno nodded. That could work, but we need time and resources. And luck, I added. A truckload of luck. All right, Sable said, making a decision. We'll set course for the nearest uninhabited moon. We'll see what Juno can do with a little more room to experiment. And if it doesn't pan out, Jax asked, echoing the question on everyone's mind. Sable's grin was all teeth and no warmth. Then we find ourselves a buyer, and we let them deal with the fallout. As we set course for the unknown, the Driftwood creaked and groaned its approval or maybe disapproval. Hard to tell with this ship. But as always, we'd face whatever came next with sarcasm, a bit of reckless hope, and an unshakable resolve to keep going, because that's what humans do best. Kes and Juno stood huddled in the corner of the cargo bay, which doubled as the Driftwood's unofficial think tank, assuming one considered thought and potential explosion to be compatible activities. The bay was dark, save for flickering lights that gave off just enough illumination to trip over crates and stub toes. It was the perfect setting for clandestine meetings and harebrained schemes, which they had in abundance. "I don't like it," Juno muttered, her voice barely above a whisper but still laden with enough sarcasm to sink a small ship. "We're playing with fire, and I'm fresh out of marshmallows." Kes nodded, peering over her shoulder to ensure their solitude remained intact. "We need allies. If Sable finds out we're messing with her precious bargaining chip without the captain's blessing, we'll end up on the wrong side of the airlock. Varric will be the death of us," Juno added, scowling. "That man would sell his own grandmother for a pat on the back from Sable." "Let's not get ahead of ourselves," Kes said, trying to keep her optimism afloat in the swamp of pessimism surrounding them. "If we can stabilize this thing, it could change everything. We just need the right people on our side." They both knew their best bet was to recruit a few like-minded souls who valued saving humanity over lining their pockets, or at least those who were easily persuaded by the promise of saving face and maybe a little fame. Kes started her search in the engine room, where Grease was hunched over a console that looked like it had seen better centuries. Grease was a massive man, with enough scars to pass as a road map to hell, but he had a heart of gold buried deep beneath layers of sarcasm and grime. "Grease," Kes began, casually leaning against the wall, a strategic move to appear nonchalant despite her insides twisting into sailor knots. "Got a minute? If it's about that blasted engine, I'm already 3 feet deep in duct tape," Grease grumbled, not looking up from his work. He was elbow-deep in wires and circuits, his fingers moving with the kind of precision that would terrify a bomb squad. "Not about the engine," Kes assured. "I'm talking about something that could save us all, and not just from going broke." "That's so," Grease replied, finally looking up, his eyes narrowing with interest. "You've got my attention." Kes quickly laid out the situation, peppering her explanation with enough sarcastic remarks to keep the mood light, yet serious enough to convey the stakes. Grease scratched his chin, leaving a smudge of grease that somehow seemed fitting. "So you want me to help you fiddle with an alien gizmo that could either save the human race or turn us into interstellar sushi?" "Pretty much," Kes said, grinning. "You in?" Grease chuckled, a deep rumble that sounded like rocks tumbling down a hill. "When you put it like that, how can I refuse? Besides, being a hero sounds better than dying of boredom in this tin can." With Grease on board, they had the muscle and technical expertise covered. Now they just needed someone with more social finesse, which naturally led them to Layla, the ship's unofficial diplomat and poker champion. She was smart, sharp, and had a knack for getting people to see things her way, usually without them realizing it. Layla was in the galley, as usual, setting up for one of her infamous poker nights, where the stakes were as high as the odds of a fistfight breaking out. "Kes," Layla greeted, her voice cheerful yet tinged with a sly undertone that suggested she always had an ace up her sleeve. "Care for a game?" "Tempting, but I need your help with something a bit riskier than losing my ration card," Kes said, sliding into a seat across from her. The galley was empty save for a few broken chairs and a table that wobbled more than a politician's promises. Layla arched an eyebrow, curiosity piqued. "Riskier than losing to me in poker?" "Color me intrigued." As Kes outlined the situation, Layla listened intently, her eyes never leaving Kes's face. It was unnerving, like being under a microscope and having every flaw, every twitch magnified. "So you're saying we could either be on the forefront of a medical miracle or end up in a galaxy-wide scandal?" Layla summarized, her voice as smooth as butter on a hot skillet. "Exactly," Kes replied, relieved that Layla seemed to understand the delicate balance they were trying to maintain. "I'm in," Layla decided, with the finality of someone who'd just laid down a royal flush, "but we'll need to keep this tight." "Varric's got eyes and ears everywhere." Speaking of which, Juno interjected, appearing from the shadows like a ghost with a caffeine addiction. "We need to move fast. Varric's sniffing around, and he's not the type to let a juicy secret slip by. Our merry band of misfits is coming together nicely," Kes said, feeling a strange sense of hope that maybe, just maybe, they could pull this off. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity, with Kes, Juno, Grease, and Layla working together in secret corners of the ship, passing notes like school kids plotting a prank. They'd managed to sneak the alien device to one of the lesser-used cargo holds, a place so forgotten it might as well have been the ship's attic. The hold was cluttered with old crates, more mysterious than useful, and dust that could have predated the ship itself. "All right," Grease said, clapping his hands together as he surveyed their makeshift lab, which was little more than a few tables and a lot of wishful thinking. Let's see what this thing can do. They formed a circle around the alien device, a contraption so bizarre it looked like it had been cobbled together from spare parts and bad ideas. Despite, or maybe because of its strange design, it held the promise of something incredible. Juno took the lead, her fingers dancing over the controls like a pianist with a death wish. If this works, we might just be able to stabilize the energy output and make it safe for testing. Safe being a relative term, Layla added, not bothering to hide her skepticism. We're still playing with the unknown here, but that's part of the fun, isn't it? Grease replied, his grin wide enough to split his face. Who wants to live forever? Anyway, Layla rolled her eyes, but there was a flicker of excitement there, too, an acknowledgement that they were standing on the precipice of something truly groundbreaking. They worked tirelessly, their efforts fueled by a mix of desperation and caffeine. With each test, they edged a little closer to finding the stability they needed, their confidence building alongside the tension. But as always, good things are never without complications. It was during a particularly delicate procedure that the door to the hold creaked open, and Varric strolled in with the kind of arrogance usually reserved for dictators and cats. Having a little party without inviting me, Varric drawled, his tone slick with insincerity. His presence was like a bucket of cold water, soaking them all in icy dread. We're just tinkering, Kes said, trying to sound casual as she subtly positioned herself between Varric and the device. Looks like more than just tinkering, Varric observed, his gaze flicking over the assortment of tools and hastily scribbled notes. Care to explain what's really going on? We're just trying to make sense of this doohickey, Grease interjected, his tone as smooth as oil on water. Figured it might help patch up the ship's systems. Varric wasn't convinced. He had the sort of face that wasn't used to smiling, and right now, it looked like it had forgotten how altogether. You know Sable doesn't appreciate secrets. Especially ones that could affect the whole crew. We're not doing anything that would endanger the driftwood, Layla said, her voice steady and confident, the kind of voice that could calm a riot or start one. Varric's eyes narrowed, suspicion swirling in their depths. Remember, if this is something that'll get us all killed, I'll make sure you're the first to find out how. With that, Varric turned on his heel and left, his footsteps echoing ominously down the corridor like the ticking of a particularly malevolent clock. Well, that went well, Juno said dryly, breaking the silence that followed Varric's departure. We need to wrap this up and figure out our next move, Kes stated, her mind racing with possibilities and pitfalls. Agreed, Grease said, already turning back to the device. We're so close it'd be a sin to stop now. More like tempting fate, Layla corrected, though she was already rolling up her sleeves, ready to dive back in. For the next several hours, they worked with the frenzy of people who knew their time was running out. Each tweak, each adjustment brought them closer to their goal, a stable energy output that would prove the device's potential. It was late into what passed for night on the ship when Juno finally sat back, wiping sweat from her brow and smudging her face with grease. We did it. I think we've got it stabilized. Kes's heart leaped at the words, a jolt of excitement mixed with a hefty dose of disbelief. You're sure as I am that Varric's going to be a pain in our asses, Juno replied with a grin. Then we need to figure out how to present this to Sable without getting ourselves shot, spaced, or otherwise disposed of, Layla said. Or Grease suggested with a mischievous glint in his eye, we could test it ourselves and then show her the results. If it works, she'd be more inclined to see things our way. It was a gamble, a risk that could either make them heroes or martyrs. But in a universe where survival was a game of dice and the stakes were life and death, sometimes the biggest risk was not taking one at all. All right, Kes agreed, feeling a surge of determination. Let's do this. But first, let's make sure none of us end up glowing in the dark. Captain Sable stood at the ship's bridge with all the authority of a schoolteacher, facing down a class of particularly unruly delinquents, and a migraine that felt like it was trying to claw its way out through her eyeballs. The negotiations with the alien faction had been going about as well as expected, which was to say they were less diplomatic talks and more like trying to wrangle a group of rabid cats into a paper bag and convince them to behave. Captain Sable, came the voice of her communications officer, Kel, who seemed to have the remarkable ability to sound both bored and on the verge of a nervous breakdown at the same time. The Praxians are demanding more concessions. They want assurances that we won't use the weapon against them. Sable rubbed her temples, willing the migraine to at least have the decency to leave her in peace for the next few minutes. Tell them the only thing we plan on using it for is to not end up as space dust. And if they keep pushing, they might find out just how convincing I can be when I'm pissed off. Kel nodded, transmitting the message with the kind of cheer reserved for executions and tax audits. The Praxians were a powerful alien faction, with all the charm of a boa constrictor and twice the squeeze. Negotiating with them was like trying to play chess with a pigeon. They knocked over all the pieces and still strut around like they've won. Meanwhile, Kess and her ragtag team of would-be rebels were about to prove that the universe had a twisted sense of humor. Huddled in their makeshift lab, they were face to face with the alien gadget that had the potential to either save humanity or blow them all to kingdom come. Maybe both if the universe was feeling particularly cheeky. All right, everyone, Kess said, narrowing her eyes at the device like it had personally insulted her mother. This is it. Juno, you're on controls. Grease, be ready to patch up whatever hell we unleash. Layla, you keep an eye out. If Varric shows his ugly mug again, we might need to persuade him to take a walk. No pressure, Juno muttered, her fingers hovering over the controls with the kind of hesitation usually reserved for defusing bombs or admitting feelings. Just pushing buttons that could end our species. Easy peasy, Grease chuckled, a gravelly noise that sounded like what might happen if a boulder learned to laugh. I've fixed bigger messes with less. Just yell when you need me. With a deep breath that said more about her nerves than words ever could, Juno engaged the device. The room filled with a low hum, like a hive of angry bees gearing up for war. Lights blinked on the device's surface, casting eerie shadows that danced around the room like drunken specters. For a moment, everything seemed fine. Too fine, which should have been the first clue that something was about to go spectacularly wrong. Energy levels are stabilizing, Juno reported, sounding almost surprised that things were going according to plan. It was the kind of surprise usually followed by an oh shit, we might actually, and there it was. The device suddenly emitted a piercing whine, the kind that could set your teeth on edge and make your stomach drop faster than a lead balloon. Lights flashed in frantic reds and yellows, the universal colors for your screwed. What the hell's it doing? Kess shouted over the noise, her voice barely audible above the cacophony. Overloading, Grease barked, already scrambling towards a panel of wires and circuits like a man on a mission from some particularly vengeful deity. It's gonna blow if we don't shut it down. Juno's fingers flew over the controls, each movement precise and desperate. Trying. Damn thing's fighting back like it's got a mind of its own. The idea that they might have stumbled onto some sentient alien tech did not fill anyone with joy, but with the device acting like it had a vendetta, it was hard to focus on anything other than not being turned into a fine mist. Grease, hit the failsafe, Kess ordered, her voice cutting through the panic like a knife. With pleasure, Grease's massive hands found the lever, pulling it with the kind of satisfaction one might reserve for a particularly nasty enemy. The whine of the machine faltered, the lights dimming until they blinked out entirely, leaving the room in a blessed silence broken only by the harsh breathing of its occupants. Well, Layla said, her voice a mix of relieved and incredulous. That was fun. Let's do it never again. Juno leaned back from the console, her face a mask of exhaustion with a dab of triumph. We're still here, at least. That's gotta count for something. More than I can say for Varric if he finds out we nearly turned the driftwood into fireworks, Kess replied, running a hand through her hair, which now looked like she'd fought a particularly vicious hurricane and lost. We need to report this to Sable before someone else does. Right, Layla agreed, already moving towards the door. Let's hope she's feeling charitable. As they made their way through the ship's corridors, the tension was a living thing, clinging to their shoulders like a determined parasite. The driftwood was a labyrinth of metal and wires, each corner and corridor familiar yet filled with the potential for disaster. They reached the bridge, a place where decisions were made and curses muttered under breath. Sable was there, looking like she'd just come off a particularly grueling battle. In a way she had, considering the Praxians were still yammering on about trust and other nonsense that seemed awfully rich coming from a race known for double crosses and deceit. Captain, Kess greeted, offering a salute that was more habit than formality. We've got a situation. Sable raised an eyebrow, her expression one of resigned patience. Oh good, because it's been such a peaceful day. Juno took up the explanation, her voice steady even as she glanced around for any sign of Varric. We've stabilized the device, but it almost blew. We managed to shut it down in time. But whatever it is, it's more dangerous than we thought. Sable's expression didn't change, but the air around them seemed to grow heavier. And you thought it'd be a good idea to test it without my knowledge because we're idiots, Grease interjected, his tone as blunt as an asteroid. And also, if it worked, it could save all our asses. Appreciate the honesty, Sable replied dryly. But you realize that if this thing goes sideways and takes out the ship, we're all screwed, you included. Kess nodded, her face as serious as a funeral. We know, Captain, but we're so close to making it work. If it can stabilize, it might be the key to pushing back the plague, to giving humanity a fighting chance, or it might be the biggest mistake in a galaxy full of them, Sable said, but there was a note of consideration in her voice. All right, lock it down for now. We'll regroup and figure out our next steps, and if Varric asks, we're conducting routine maintenance. I'd rather not have to space anyone today. With a nod, the team retreated, leaving Sable to deal with the Praxians, who were likely still grumbling about their terms. The air felt a little lighter as they moved away, the possibility of success a small but stubborn flame in the darkness. Back in their makeshift lab, the device sat silent and inert, a sleeping dragon waiting to either bring salvation or disaster. "So what's next?" Layla asked, leaning against a crate with the kind of casual grace that suggested either confidence or exhaustion, probably both. "Next," Kes said, her eyes fixed on the alien doohickey, "we figure out how to control this thing without blowing ourselves up. And maybe, just maybe, we save humanity in the process, or we end up as a cautionary tale," Juno added, though the spark of determination in her eyes suggested she was more than willing to take that gamble. Grease chuckled, shaking his head. "Well, I've always wanted to be famous. Even if it's just as the idiot who turned a spaceship into a shooting star, with the plan set and their course laid out, albeit on a path with more bumps than a teenager's forehead, they got to work. Each failure was a lesson, each small victory a step closer to their goal. Time passed, marked only by the soft hum of the ship and the occasional curse from Juno when the machinery decided to express its displeasure. It was work that demanded every ounce of their focus, the kind that left no room for doubt or hesitation. Yet, despite the odds stacked against them and the ever-present threat hanging over their heads like a particularly vindictive sword, the team moved forward. Because if they didn't, who would? "All right, everyone," Kes announced, gathering their attention. "Let's give it one more try. And this time, if it starts acting up, we shut it down and rethink our strategy. No heroics, just smart thinking." Layla nodded, her fingers brushing over the controls with the kind of care usually reserved for defusing bombs or dealing with particularly sensitive egos. "You got it, boss." With a deep breath and a silent prayer to any deity listening, they activated the device once more. The hum returned, the lights flickered, and for a moment, everything seemed to hang in a precarious balance. "Energy levels holding," Juno reported, her voice steady even if her heart was doing cartwheels in her chest. "Keep an eye on the output," Grease advised, his hands ready to spring into action if things went south. The seconds ticked by, each one a small eternity as they watched the device with the kind of intensity usually reserved for defusing bombs or predicting the lottery. Finally, the light settled into a soft, steady glow, a sign that maybe, just maybe, they'd managed to tame this particular beast. For now, at least. "We did it," Kes murmured, her voice filled with a mix of disbelief and triumph. It was a small victory, but in their world, any victory was worth celebrating. "Let's not get too cocky," Layla cautioned, though her smile suggested she was feeling pretty damn pleased. "We've still got a long way to go before we can call this a success. But it's a start," Kes replied, her confidence bolstered by their progress. And right now, that's enough. As they secured the device and cleaned up the lab, the team shared a sense of camaraderie forged in the fires of near disaster. They had a long road ahead, filled with pitfalls and the ever-present threat of being discovered. But for the first time in a long time, the odds didn't seem quite so insurmountable. And maybe, just maybe, they'd live to see another dawn in this cold, uncaring universe. Driftwood, Kes thought as she navigated the dimly lit corridors, the home of the brave, the land of the perpetually malfunctioning. She muttered the words as if they were a prayer, her footsteps echoing off the metal walls like a death knell. The last thing she needed was a run-in with Varric, that snake in a human suit, but given her luck, he'd probably pop up like a zit on prom night. Just as she was contemplating her odds of survival, Juno caught up to her, panting slightly. "Hey, Kes, you think Sable's really gonna let us keep fiddling with that alien gadget? Sounds like a recipe for disaster." Kes shot her a sideways glance. "You think we've got a choice? We're flying a damn suicide mission on a space rock held together with duct tape and wishful thinking. Besides, if it fails, at least we'll go out with a bang, not a whimper," Juno snorted. "And if it works, we're heroes. Or at least, we can pretend to be until someone figures out what idiots we are." Their banter was cut short by the sudden presence of Varric, emerging from the shadows with all the subtlety of a bad hangover. "Going somewhere, ladies?" His voice was oily, like a salesman who just spotted a sucker in the crowd. "Just out for a stroll, Varric," Kes replied, her smile a tight, unfriendly line. "Why, you want to join us? We can share horror stories." "Tempting," Varric said, stepping closer. "But I was thinking more along the lines of taking you to see Sable." Kes's heart sank, and she glanced at Juno, who offered a shrug that said, "Well, we're screwed." They were guided, if you could call being ushered at gunpoint guidance, to the bridge, where Captain Sable was orchestrating the most delicate dance of her career, negotiating with the Praxians. The bridge was crowded, not with people, but with tension. The air seemed thick enough to chew, and the console lights blinked their warnings like a nervous tick. "Captain, I brought you some company," Varric announced, his tone dripping with false camaraderie. Sable turned slowly, her eyes landing on them with the kind of warmth usually reserved for a wet sock. "Kes, Juno, just the pair I wanted to see. Varric tells me you've been busy. Busy's one word for it, Captain, Kes replied, trying to keep her tone light, even if her gut was twisting like a pretzel. Juno, ever the optimist, added, yes, making sure we don't become space dust. You know, the usual. Sable's expression didn't change, but somehow the room felt colder. Varric mentioned something about the alien device almost taking us all on a one-way trip to oblivion. Care to elaborate? Kes swallowed, feeling every eye on her. We had a hiccup, but it's under control now. We think it can help with the plague, give us a chance. Varric interjected with the timing of an unwelcome fart, or it could blow us all to hell. That seems more likely. Sable sighed, rubbing her temples as if trying to massage away the stupidity of her crew. Varric, I'm sure you have better things to do than speculate, like breathing through your nose. Varric's smile was the kind that made you want to check your wallet. Just doing my part for ship safety, Captain. Your concern is noted, Sable replied dryly, turning back to Kes and Juno. We're hanging by a thread here. The ship's falling apart at the seams and the Praxians are getting antsy. If they decide we're more trouble than we're worth, we're done. As if on cue, the ship shuddered, a groan echoing through its metal bones. And there goes another piece of the driftwood, Juno remarked, her voice laced with the resigned humor of someone who had seen too many things go wrong. Sable ignored the quip, focusing on the task at hand. We need something to go right for once, and if that means trusting you two with this alien tech, so be it. But one more screw-up, and I'll personally see we don't have to worry about the Praxians or Varric disposing of us. Kes nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle like a particularly unfashionable cloak. We won't screw it up, Captain. Good, Sable replied, her tone brooking no argument. Now get back to it, and Kes, keep me in the loop. With that, they were dismissed, Varric's smirk following them like a bad smell. As they made their way back through the ship, Juno let out a breath she seemed to have been holding since they stepped onto the bridge. Well, that was fun, Juno said, her voice somewhere between a laugh and a groan. We didn't die, so that's a win. Yeah, Kes agreed, though she couldn't shake the feeling that their luck was running on fumes. Sable's right, we need something to work. Their return to the makeshift lab was greeted by the usual suspects, blinking lights, humming machinery, and the alien gadget sitting there, innocent as a grenade with the pin pulled. Grease was already at work, his hands deftly fixing what others might have deemed unfixable. Hey, geniuses, Grease greeted, not looking up from his task. How's life under the captain's watchful eye? Still kicking, Kes replied, her tone dry. For now, what's the status? Grease shrugged, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. The thing's stable, mostly. But it's like trying to keep a rabid dog on a leash. You never know when it'll turn on you. Great, Juno muttered, joining him at the console. Just what we need, a time bomb with attitude. Layla's voice piped up from her spot in the corner where she was tinkering with another console. Look on the bright side, at least we're not dead yet. High bar you've set, Kes joked, though the humor felt strained. Let's get to work. If we can prove this thing'll do more than just give us a light show, maybe the Praxians will stop breathing down our necks. The team set to work, their movements harmonious in the way only desperation could orchestrate. Each keystroke, wire twist, and whispered curse brought them closer to their goal, or so they hoped. Iors bled into each other, the routine punctuated by the occasional shudder of the ship or the distant echo of Varric's voice, which had the charm of a cheese grater on nerves. It was a symphony of chaos, and Kes was the conductor, keeping her team focused and on task. Eventually, Layla leaned back, her face a mask of exhaustion. I've checked this thing 6 ways to Sunday. I think we're good to go, Kes nodded, rubbing her gritty eyes. All right, let's fire it up. But remember, we're not heroes, just idiots trying not to die. Speak for yourself, Juno grinned. I've always seen myself as more of an anti-hero. They activated the device, holding their collective breath as the alien tech hummed to life. The lights flickered, the machinery groaned, but somehow this time the universe decided to cut them a break. The device stabilized, its energy levels holding steady like a cat that had finally decided to stop clawing at the drapes. Looks good, Grease said, sounding surprised despite himself. We might actually pull this off. Or explode, Layla added, never one to miss the chance for little gallows humor. Either way, it'll be memorable, Juno agreed. And I dunno about you, but I'd rather go out with a bang than a whimper. As they powered down the gadget, securing it for now, Kes couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. It was a fragile thing, easily snuffed out by the lurking specter of failure. But for now, it was enough to keep her moving forward. Their moment of triumph was short-lived, however, as Varric reappeared, his expression a disturbingly gleeful mix of smugness and anticipation. Captain wants to see you again. What now? Kes asked, exasperation coloring her words. Seems like the ship's got one more surprise for us, Varric replied, his tone suggesting that whatever it wasn't good news. As they made their way back to the bridge, tension coiled tight in Kes's stomach. They arrived to find Sable pacing, her expression one of barely contained frustration. The Praxians aren't happy, Sable said without preamble. They're threatening to pull out of negotiations. Juno raised an eyebrow. And that's different from yesterday. How? It's different because they're serious this time, Sable snapped. They're tired of waiting and we need to give them something. Fast. Kes felt the weight of the universe pressing down on her shoulders. We're doing our best, Captain, but if we push this thing too hard, we might not have a ship left to bargain with. Then you better find another way, Sable replied, her gaze piercing. Because if the Praxians abandon us, we're all out of options. As they left the bridge once more, the reality of their situation settled like a stone in Kes's gut. The Driftwood was a ship on the brink, held together by hope and desperation, and unless they pulled off a miracle, it was going to take them all down with it. Well, Layla said as they moved back to their makeshift lab. Guess we've got our work cut out for us. Yeah, Kes replied, her mind racing with possibilities. But we've got one thing on our side. Juno looked at her, skepticism written all over her face. And what's that? Desperation, Kes said, a wry smile tugging at her lips. There's nothing more motivating than knowing you've got nothing left to lose. With renewed determination, the team dove back into their work, each step guided by the knowledge that failure was not an option. They were a ragtag bunch on a failing ship in the middle of nowhere, but they were all they had, and maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. Kes and Juno huddled in the makeshift lab, the faint glow of the alien gadget casting long shadows across their faces. The hum of the Driftwood's engines provided the soundtrack, an ominous, irregular beat that could stop at any moment. Ever feel like we're on a sinking ship trying to patch holes with chewing gum? Juno asked, leaning against a console that looked like it had seen better centuries. Not the worst analogy, Kes replied, eyes flicking over the alien device, though chewing gum might actually hold better than this mess. The door slid open with a hiss and Grease ambled in, wiping his hands on his grimy overalls. Heard you two were working on saving our sorry hides again. Someone has to, Kes said. And since no one's volunteering, it falls to us. Well, I've got good news and bad news, Grease announced, sitting heavily on a nearby crate. The whole room seemed to brace itself for impact. Good news is I fixed the stabilizers. Bad news, Juno prompted, already regretting the question. Bad news is I only fixed the stabilizers, Grease replied with a shrug. The rest of the ship's still a floating death trap. Story of our lives, Kes muttered, turning back to the gadget. How long do you think we have before something else breaks? Grease scratched his chin, his expression philosophical. Could be months, could be minutes. Driftwood's a fickle old girl. Guess we better hurry then. Kes nodded toward Juno. Ready to put on a show, Juno grinned, the kind of smile that suggested she'd long ago accepted the universe was out to get her. Always. What are we doing, exactly? Something stupid, Kes replied, already making her way out of the lab. But with any luck, something stupid enough to work. The ship's corridors were a maze of flickering lights and exposed wires, snaking through the vessel like mechanical intestines. It was the kind of place that screamed hazard in half a dozen languages. As Kes and Juno reached the cargo bay, Driftwood's unofficial headquarters of chaos and caffeine, the rest of the crew was already assembled. Layla, ever the vigilant watchdog, nodded at their arrival. Kel was there too, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else, probably sipping a drink far stronger than the ship's recycled water. You all know why we're here, Kes started, her voice loud enough to cut through the ambient noise. We've got an alien device that might just save us from becoming space flotsam, and it might also kill us, Varric pointed out, never missing an opportunity to play devil's advocate. His grin was sharp, like a knife that hadn't been cleaned properly. Thanks for the reminder, Varric, Juno said, rolling her eyes. But we've got bigger problems, like Sable's pirates breathing down our necks. Right, Kes agreed. They're not thrilled about our little science experiment, and they're getting antsy. If we don't deliver, we're back to square one or worse. What's the plan then? Grease asked, arms crossed. He had the kind of posture that suggested he knew how things would go wrong and he had a bet riding on it. We give them a show, Kes said, her eyes meeting each crew member's in turn. We crank this thing up and make it look good. Make them think we've got the key to the plague right here. And what if we don't? Layla asked, ever the realist. Then we improvise, Juno replied. But right now we need to buy time, and hope that time doesn't come with a side of explosions. The crew exchanged glances, a silent agreement forming, not because they had any real confidence, but because there was no alternative. Desperation might be an unsteady foundation, but it was all they had. Then let's get to it, Grease said, clapping his hands together. I've always wanted to see what happens when you mix alien tech and human stupidity. The Driftwood's bridge was a cacophony of sound, lights blinking erratically like a city during a blackout. Captain Sable stood at the center of it all, her expression a study in weary determination. Good to see you took time out of your busy schedule of not dying, Sable greeted as Kes and Juno entered. Her tone was dry enough to start fires. We aim to please, Juno responded, flashing a cheeky grin. Got a trick up our sleeves. Let's hope it's not just a rabbit, Sable said, her gaze sharp as a laser scalpel. The Praxians are on the edge, and we're running out of things to promise them. Don't you worry, Captain, Kess assured, stepping up to the main console. We're about to give them a show they'll never forget. As Sable looked on, Kess and Juno worked the controls, each keystroke a gamble with stakes that could blast them to atoms. The alien gadget hummed ominously, its power levels climbing towards the critical threshold. The bridge lights flickered in response, adding to the general ambience of impending catastrophe. All right, let's do this, Kess said, steeling herself. Everyone ready? The crew nodded, the kind of nod that said, we're here because we've got no other choice. With a deep breath, Kess hit the final sequence and the alien device surged into life. The air crackled with energy, the ship's system straining under the pressure. Red warning lights flashed in a panicked dance, alarms blaring like a drunken chorus. It was exactly the kind of spectacle they needed. Is it supposed to do that? Kel asked, his voice barely audible over the din. Sure, Juno replied, though her face betrayed a flicker of doubt. Why not? The Praxians' holographic representation flickered into view, their alien features inscrutable. What is happening with your vessel? Their leader demanded, voice resonating through the bridge with the authority of 1,000 disappointed parents. We're making progress, Sable replied, her tone a masterpiece of confidence and bullshit. The device is stabilizing. Soon we'll have the solution to your concerns. The Praxian leader's eyes narrowed, a gesture that seemed to say, I'm too old for this nonsense. But they didn't cut the connection, and that was all the encouragement the crew needed. Keep it going, Kess urged, her fingers flying over the controls. Just a little longer. The ship trembled, the vibrations rattling through the bulkheads like a giant's annoyed tap. The alien gadget flared, a burst of light blooming from its core. It was beautiful in a way that only things that might kill you tend to be. That's it, Juno whispered, as if speaking too loudly might shatter the illusion. Come on, just a little more. As the seconds ticked by, the gadget finally settled, its energy output leveling off. The ship's alarms quieted one by one, leaving an eerie silence in their wake. It's stable, Kess said, relief washing over her. For now, Sable let out a breath she seemed to have been holding since she took command. Good work. Let's hope the Praxians agree. The alien leader reappeared, their expression unreadable. This display is intriguing, they conceded, but we require more substantive results. We're working on it, Sable replied, her voice unwavering. But as you can see, we're on the right track. The exchange ended, leaving the crew to bask in the afterglow of their minor victory. It wasn't much, but it was enough to buy them time. Looks like we're not dead yet, Juno remarked, a wry grin tugging at her lips. High praise, Kess said, though her heart wasn't entirely in the sarcasm. Let's hope we can keep it up. Varric appeared, his presence as welcome as a hangover. Not bad, considering I thought we were all about to die. Always a pleasure, Varric, Kess replied, not bothering to hide her disdain. Just saying, Varric continued, his grin as slippery as ever. If you need help making things blow up, I'm your guy. We'll keep that in mind, Juno said, brushing past him. We're off to see if we can't turn this circus into something useful. As the crew returned to the lab, their spirits lifted by the narrowest of margins, Kess couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. It was fragile like a candle in a hurricane, but it was there, and in the vacuum of space, that was often more than they could ask for. Still think we're idiots? Juno asked, her voice light. Absolutely, Kess replied, but her smile was genuine. But at least we're idiots with a plan. With that, they dove back into their work, the weight of the universe bearing down on them less heavily than before. They were a ragtag bunch in a failing ship, but they had grit, determination, and just enough luck to make it interesting. And in the vast, uncaring expanse of space, maybe that was enough. Kess and Juno made their way through the driftwood, the ship creaking and groaning like it had arthritis in every joint. The corridors were a tangle of exposed wires and blinking panels that looked more like a Christmas tree on life support than a functioning spacecraft. Each step was a reminder that one misstep could send them plummeting to an explosive end. Just the kind of comforting thought they needed. So any idea how we're actually gonna stabilize this thing? Juno asked, tapping her fingers against the alien weapon under her arm like it was a percussion instrument. Working on a plan, Kess replied. Step 1, don't blow ourselves up. Step 2, make it look like we know what we're doing. Ah, the usual, Juno said with a smirk. If at first you don't succeed, redefine success. As they entered the lab, the alien gadget sat in the center, casting a glow that was probably ominous, but they'd been around it so long it felt almost comforting, like a radioactive nightlight. The gadget hummed, a sound that suggested something between contentment and potential genocide. Grease was already there, fiddling with a console that looked like it had seen the wrong end of a bar fight. You two lovebirds ready to play with fire? He asked, not looking up from his work. More like setting fire to our asses, Juno shot back. but sure, let's call it playing. Kess pulled up a schematic of the ship on a battered screen. Here's the deal. We need to reroute the power from the stabilizers to the alien device. If we're lucky, it'll stabilize both the ship and us long enough to cook up a cure for the plague. And if we're not lucky, Grease asked, twiddling a wire that probably held some significance, but he couldn't be bothered to remember what. Then it's been nice knowing you, Kess said, flashing a grin that said she meant it, sort of. Great, just what I needed, Grease mumbled, tossing the wire aside. Another near-death experience to spice up my week. Juno stepped up to the console, fingers flying over the keys with the kind of efficiency that suggested she was either a genius or insane, possibly both. Okay, let's get this show on the road. Grease, you're on power distribution. Kess, keep that thing from frying our circuits. And I'll just try not to blow us up. Perfect. I love a good plan with clear roles, Kess replied, her voice dripping with sarcasm as she joined in on the console work. The alien device flared to life, casting the room in an eerie glow that made their shadows dance like overcaffeinated ghosts. Power levels started climbing, the kind of climb that made roller coasters look like child's play. Steady, Kess muttered, her hands a blur as she adjusted the flow. Don't let it spike. Like I have a choice, Grease grumbled. This ship's held together with duct tape and profanity. Let's hope it's enough, Juno said, though her confidence was as flimsy as the ship's electrical system. We're about to find out. The gadget whirred and clicked, sounds that in another context could have been friendly. Here they were just unnerving. The ship's lights flickered, and for a moment everything seemed to pause, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Then, with a crackle and a burst of light, the device stabilized. The screens around them lit up with data, streams of information that might as well have been written in ancient runes for all they comprehended it. Did we do it? Grease asked, not daring to look away from the console, as if staring at it long enough could change the outcome. Looks like it, Kess replied, relief in her voice. We're still here anyway, that's a win in my book. And the plague? Juno asked, eyeing the readouts. Did we cook up the cure? According to this, Kess tapped the screen. Yeah. We've got something that might just work. Well, isn't that a kick in the teeth? Grease said, a grin spreading across his face. We might actually have pulled this off. As they shared a moment of triumph, Varric slinked into the room, his grin as slick as an oil spill. Heard you kids are playing with the big toys now. Varric, always a pleasure, Kess said, not bothering to hide her lack of enthusiasm. What do you want? Just checking in. You know, seeing if I need to start looking for a new gig as a ghost. We're fine, Juno replied, her tone making it clear that Varric's presence was as welcome as a root canal. So you can scuttle back to whatever shadow you crawled out of. Ah, but I like it here, Varric said, his smile as charming as a politician's promise. Especially now that you've got something the whole ship's gonna want. What's that supposed to mean? Grease asked, squinting like he was trying to see through Varric's facade. Words out, Varric replied. The crew knows you've got a cure. They're not gonna sit around waiting for scraps. Just what we needed, Kess said, pinching the bridge of her nose. A mutiny on top of everything else. Guess we'll have to deal with it, Juno said, her expression steely. We can't let them ruin this now. As if on cue, the ship's PA system crackled to life, Captain Sable's voice cutting through the static like a knife. Crew of the Driftwood, report to your stations. We've got a situation. And by situation, I mean we're about to have visitors. Of course, Juno sighed. Because things couldn't just go smoothly for once. Let's get to the bridge, Kess said, already moving. We'll figure out how to handle this as we go. The three of them made their way to the bridge, Varric slinking along behind them like a bad smell you couldn't quite get rid of. As they arrived, they found Sable at the center of the chaos, her expression as hard as ever. Glad you could join the party, Sable said, barely glancing their way. We've got a rebellion brewing and the Praxians are getting twitchy. Perfect timing, Kess muttered, taking her place at a console. What's our play? We need to keep this ship in one piece long enough to negotiate, Sable replied, her voice a mix of exhaustion and determination. We show them we've got the cure and that we're not handing it over until we're safe. And how do we do that without getting shot? Juno asked, crossing her arms. With style, Sable said, the ghost of a smile on her lips. And maybe a bit of luck. As the crew settled in for the standoff, the tension on the bridge was thick enough to slice with a knife. The Praxians waited, their holographic image flickering ominously, while the ship's crew simmered with anticipation and fear. Here goes nothing, Sable said, turning to face the Praxian leader. We have the cure, but we can't give it to you while we're under threat. Your internal issues are not our concern, the Praxian leader replied, their voice as cold as the void outside. It becomes your concern when we're the only ones who can help, Sable countered, her tone firm. Help us and we'll help you. The silence stretched, the Praxian leader's expression unreadable as they weighed their options. Finally, they spoke. Very well, we will hold back until your situation is contained, but do not test our patience. Understood, Sable said, nodding. We'll handle it. As the Praxian transmission ended, the bridge erupted into motion, everyone scrambling to keep the ship from descending into chaos. Kess and Juno returned to their consoles, their fingers flying over the keys as they worked to stabilize the ship's systems. "Think we can pull this off?" Juno asked, her voice barely audible over the din. "We have to," Kess replied, her focus unwavering. There's no other choice. The minutes stretched into an eternity, the ship a cauldron of tension and fear. But gradually, miraculously, the situation began to stabilize. The mutiny was quelled, the rebellion fizzling out as word spread of the cure's potential. "Looks like we've got a handle on it," Grease said, wiping sweat from his brow. "Don't jinx it," Kess warned, though a smile tugged at her lips. Sable's voice cut through the remaining chaos like a lighthouse through fog. "All right, everyone, let's finish this. We've got a cure and we've got a future. Let's make sure we live to see it." As the crew rallied, the ship finally felt like it was coming together, the chaos calming into a semblance of order. They'd done it against all odds. "Well, that was fun," Juno said, leaning back with a sigh of relief. "Speak for yourself," Kess replied, though her heart was light. "I think I've had enough excitement for one lifetime. And yet here we are," Grease added, a grin breaking through his usual cynicism. As the driftwood settled into quiet, a cautious hope bloomed among them. It wasn't much, but it was better than they'd dared hope for. Against the odds, they had triumphed, not just through skill, but through grit and sheer stubbornness. In the vast, indifferent expanse of space, maybe that was enough. The driftwood creaked like an old man getting out of bed, its innards a mess of wires, circuits, and human desperation. Captain Sable stood in the middle of the chaos, one hand rubbing at her temples, the universal sign for "I'm this close to spacing someone." The migraine was a constant companion these days, probably brought on by the near-constant barrage of incompetence masquerading as her crew. "All right, listen up," she barked, her voice cutting through the chatter like a laser scalpel through butter. "We've managed not to blow ourselves up for once, and I intend to keep it that way. So everyone, try to act like you've been in space before. Act like it. Hell, I'm still trying to figure out how to spell it," Jax quipped from his station, not even bothering to look up from his console. His skepticism about the alien device had been vindicated, but he'd have preferred to be wrong if it meant a quieter life. Sable shot him a look that could have melted titanium. "Jax, if I wanted your input, I'd have asked for it. Twice." "Noted, Captain," he replied, allowing himself a small, satisfied smirk. Kess and Juno were huddled over another console, their fingers flying across keys with the kind of speed that suggested they were either saving humanity or trying to beat the high score on a very old arcade game. The glowing alien device sat between them, its hum a constant reminder of just how easily things could go sideways. "Feels like we're trying to stabilize a house of cards in a hurricane," Juno muttered, her usual smirk replaced by a more serious expression. "Who knew saving civilization would be so damn finicky? Beats my last gig," Kess replied, her tone dry as a desert. "Though I guess sewage maintenance on Earth wasn't exactly glamorous," Juno chuckled. "And they say space is glamorous, but no one tells you that it smells like burnt toast and despair. Guess that's why we're out here," Kess said, offering a grin that was all teeth. "Someone's gotta scrub the universe's toilet." Meanwhile, Grease was performing his usual magic with the stabilizers, mumbling to himself like a mad inventor. His hands moved with the kind of precision that suggested he was either a savant or had absolutely no idea what he was doing. "If I get out of this alive, I'm building a ship out of something that isn't held together with chewing gum and wishes." "Dream big, Grease," Juno called over, her fingers never pausing on the console. "But let's focus on not dying first. Always with the negativity," Grease replied, his voice laced with mock hurt. "And here I thought we had a good thing going." Juno rolled her eyes but couldn't suppress her grin. It was these moments that made the impending doom almost bearable. On the bridge, things were no less frenetic. Varric lounged in a corner, his presence as reassuring as a snake in a nursery. He had a talent for appearing exactly where he wasn't wanted, a skill honed to perfection over years of being universally disliked. "Why are you still here, Varric?" Sable asked, not bothering to disguise her irritation. "Shouldn't you be off somewhere else being a pest, keeping an eye on things?" he replied, his grin sly. "Wouldn't want to miss the moment when you all realize you need me. If that moment ever comes, it'll be the end times," Sable shot back, eyes narrowing. "And trust me, I plan to be long gone before then." "Touché," Varric said, folding his arms. "But we all have our uses, Captain." "Even the rats," Sable ignored him, turning her attention back to the main view screen where the Praxian hologram flickered like a bad TV signal. The Praxians were still holding back for now, but she knew their patience was thinner than the ship's hull. "Kel, status on the Praxian fleet," she called, her voice sharp enough to cut through the static. Kel, the communications officer, looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "They're holding position, Captain. Seems they're content to let us implode first." "Generous of them," Sable said dryly. "Keep me posted." The minutes ticked by with all the grace of a three-legged elephant, each second dragging on another layer of tension. But slowly, remarkably, things began to settle. The ship stopped groaning like a haunted house, the lights flickered less, and the consoles stopped threatening to self-destruct. "Looks like we might actually survive to see another catastrophe," Jax remarked, his tone light but his eyes serious. "Don't count your space chickens," Juno said, though even she couldn't keep the optimism entirely out of her voice. "We've still got a long way to go." The mutinous rumblings from the crew had quieted, the promise of a cure enough to tamp down the flames of rebellion, for now at least. Sable knew better than to assume that desperation wouldn't rear its head again. "All right," she said, addressing the bridge. "We've got the cure, the Praxians are waiting for their turn at the table, and we're still flying. I'd call that a win, not much of a prize," Varric said, his voice oozing with sarcasm. "But I guess beggars can't be choosers. Keep talking and I'll show you what else beggars can be," Sable replied, her patience worn thinner than a solar sail in a hurricane. With the immediate crisis averted, the crew settled into the uneasy peace that followed disaster narrowly escaped. Sable leaned back in her chair, letting the tension bleed out of her muscles. There was still work to be done, but for the first time it felt manageable. In the makeshift lab, Kess and Juno took a moment to breathe, the alien device now a stable, if still unnerving, presence. "Can't believe we pulled it off," Kess said, her voice tinged with disbelief. "Feels like we were one wrong move away from disaster the whole time." "That's because we were," Juno replied, her smirk making a reappearance. "But hey, if at first you don't succeed, redefine success, right?" Kess laughed, a genuine relieved sound. "Think they'll make that our mission motto?" "Wouldn't be surprised," Juno said, leaning back in her chair. "We're a walking disaster, but somehow we're still here, and that's gotta count for something." "Guess it's true what they say," Kess said, a wry smile on her lips. Humanity's too stubborn to die. They sat in comfortable silence, the enormity of their accomplishment settling in. It wasn't the end of their journey, not by a long shot, but it was a hell of a start. On the bridge, Sable watched as the crew gradually returned to their stations, the ship settling into a new, cautious rhythm. They had a cure, they had a future, and maybe, just maybe, they had a chance to rebuild. "All right, people," she said, her voice carrying the weight of command and the promise of a new beginning. "Let's get to work. We've got a ship to run, a cure to distribute, and a galaxy to save. No pressure, right?" A ripple of laughter went through the crew, their spirits buoyed by the hope that had been so elusive. They were battered, bruised, and borderline insane, but they were still here. And that was something to cling to in the vast, indifferent void of space. As the driftwood sailed on, its course set for the unknown, the crew found solace in their shared struggles. They were more than just survivors. They were a testament to humanity's tenacity, its refusal to bow to the whims of fate. Whatever lay ahead, they knew they would face it together, armed with their wit, their resilience, and a cure that promised a future. Humanity might be a stubborn, chaotic mess, but it was their mess, and they'd be damned if they let it go to waste. And if that wasn't the most human thing of all, then they'd just have to redefine what it meant to be human. Because in the end, survival wasn't about perfection. It was about picking up the pieces, duct taping them together, and daring to hope that maybe, just maybe, things would work out in the end. And for the crew of the Driftwood, that was enough.